All right, YouTube, in the news today, you may have heard that they're going back to a World War I era antiseptic, which shows promise in defeating superbugs. It's called Acriflavine. It's been known for some time, some of these older style treatments, both pharmaceutical preparations and potentially even herbal compounds of various sorts, can prevent some of the spread of at least the bacterial side of the infections and diseases that are plaguing mankind right now. It's actually it's getting to the point here where modern treatments using antibiotics and so forth have become so susceptible to failing, especially in a clinical setting, that they're almost worthless. What they don't tell you in this story, wherever it's being covered, is the fact that they're terrified. They make it sound hopeful, like, oh, don't worry, people, these superbugs will take care of them soon enough. We've got like trench warfare era antiseptic that can kill off, flesh-eating viruses or something. That's what they're making it sound like. What they really mean to say, if it weren't for the bias and spin, is, oh yeah, none of the truly modern treatments that we have, that we've relied upon since the sulfa drug era, we're talking World War II, early 50s, and then forth developing, erythritol and all, I mean, not erythritol, erythromycin and all of these other various compounds. None of those really work reliably anymore. The penicillin that we use to eradicate, more or less, some of these diseases from the Western world no longer have effect, and we've bottlenecked our ability actually to fight them. So as a last-ditch effort, we're going back to 100 years ago sort of medical treatments. We're talking about essentially the amputation and chloroform era, really. I think that should probably worry people more than it gives them hope. Yes, these old-style antiseptics, these chemical compounds that are capable of destroying bacteria, as well as older-style treatments, some old iron lung machine, yeah, they can keep people alive, they can prevent infection and so forth. But you're really going to end up like, if you don't advance technology further and figure out, I don't know, using genetics to treat these things, or a new wave of antibiotics that nothing has immunity to, properly administered, hopefully to fully eradicate some of this crap from the world. If you don't, eventually you're screwed. You're going to have some sort of outbreak. Some flesh-eating bacteria will come along that's able to penetrate the human immune system much more easily and won't even respond to the antiseptic you're using. Now, I've pointed out for some of these things, in my homeopathy video I spoke about this, some of these things are just as easily treated with powdered rock salt and sulfur as they are now with modern antibiotics, specifically because we've overused the latter. It's much more difficult for bacteria, especially, not viruses, but bacteria, the main foe of mankind when you're talking about wounds getting infected and things like that. It's difficult for them to survive on surfaces that have been treated in certain ways. Personally, I'm a proponent of the concept that we should be looking into probiotics. We should be looking into the basic principle of flooding areas, especially in medical settings, and the human body with bacteria that are harmless, in order to preclude harmful bacteria potentially from growing therein. For instance, we pickle food, we put them in vinegar, we make cheese or something like that. There are bacteria present in the cheese, and other bacteria have difficulty proliferating on that surface. Will it spoil after a while? Yeah, certain types of cheeses especially. Then again, you've got 1,000-year-old blocks of cheese that are technically sort of still edible, that still include the original colonies and all, so to speak. It is possible to do so. I think probiotics, genetic research, I think those are the wave of the future. This should be seen as a very temporary and desperate measure. The fact that we can't rely upon antibiotics that we've been using for half a century, we have to go back to the pre-sulfa drug era to try to solve this problem, is probably the most worrying thing that anyone who knows anything about epidemiology can possibly hear. The idea that we are now essentially defenseless other than topical things we were using back in the World War period that were hit and miss at the time. Yes, they were far better than the things that people were using before, but they were nowhere near as good as the sulfa drugs and all the other antibiotic materials that were made thereafter, which is why it eclipsed the use of Acriflavine and all of these other sort of topical things that were being used. The concept of hydrogen peroxide and isopropyl alcohol and powdered sulfur and rubbing rock salt into a wound is that helps greatly. You can also bathe the wound in liquor or wine or something like that and potentially have a lower rate of infection. But is it as good as the ability, once if an infection does proceed to manifest itself and then proliferates and begins spreading, is this material actually going to do much? They're talking about turning it into a nasal spray, potentially priming people's bodies with this compound to boost their immune system and hopefully keep them from getting infected by some bacteria in the first place. Will it even work? They're talking about, oh, well, we've got material from the early 1900s that suggests maybe sort of this could happen. We haven't done any modern clinical trials. The thing is, and they point this out rightly, link in the description, that back then, people's ability to study how these things were working were a little bit more limited. So it could be that it has some significant action, well beyond simply being a topical antiseptic sort of material. Maybe that's true. That's great, but then bacteria will eventually become resistant to this material too, potentially. That brings up a whole nother set of problems. Will it save people short term? Yeah, but the problem is, we've run out of antibiotics to make, it seems, over time. Very few new antibiotics are being made. We became so reliant upon the old guard of these materials, the penicillins and so forth, that we sort of exhausted their usefulness, and now they still administer them. They're still fine for preventing most bacteria from proliferating, but then there are superbugs that are totally or partially resistant to them. It doesn't really help for them. What we need to do is look at trying to combat these things in a holistic manner. I say holistic as in using every possible means we can possibly use. If this means including herbal regimens in with our medicine temporarily while we develop new technology to fight them, we may have no other choice. We may not have any other choice than to literally prescribe people jars of powdered sulfur and rock salt, or ground up chamomile flowers or something like that for their infected wounds temporarily while we work on new technology if we drag our feet any longer. That's pretty scary. You're looking at, look at it this way. We're talking right now about resistant tuberculosis making the rounds. Something like 1 billion people are infected with it worldwide at this point. Tuberculosis has come back. The Victorian disease, now resistant to the means with which we basically eradicated it from most parts of the Western world. It's back in vogue. And millions of people in the United States now have it too. People get a permeable border, and resistant tuberculosis has come across that border. Well, thanks Obama, again. Although it was there before, honestly, he arrived, so we can't blame him necessarily. Blame the lackadaisical situation as a total, I suppose. Now people will begin dying of this disease. The fact that people now, unlike in the Victorian era, tend not to be starving and so many of them don't even have symptoms, doesn't mean it's not an accident waiting to happen. You get an economic downturn, people are eating less all of a sudden. It starts taking tens or hundreds of thousands of lives. You'll think that it's the late 1800s again, honestly, if that happens. Be pretty piss poor. Be pretty bad. So I think that it should be seen as not necessarily some great hope against superbugs, because that's the way we were always talking about antibiotics before. Oh yeah, we can wipe out all these diseases. It's just a matter of time because resistance, subsistence, nobody cares about that sort of crap. It's really rare, it'll never proliferate, it'll never get more widespread, and of course it did. And we acted as though antibiotics, 50s style, were the savior of the Western world. It didn't work. It didn't turn out that way. I remember it was probably a decade and a half ago, they were talking about some surface, some plastic they impregnated with chemicals that they could use for like bathroom stalls and stuff that would kill any bacteria that landed on it. I never saw that deployed. We've had all of these developments, real or imagined, that we supposedly will use to make the world finally resistant to human epidemic, and it never actually happens. We have to continue changing form. The best hope we have in the case of like maybe World War I antiseptics and so forth is that it's been a long time since we deployed them. So the odds of any residual resistance from when we were using it is pretty low. If we wait long enough, we might even see the downfall of the superbugs. Maybe these diseases that have become resistant are less effective overall outside of the context of actually trying to destroy them with antibiotics. And maybe 50, 100 years from now we can bring back routine penicillin, and then the next time that we bring it back, maybe we can use it to greater effect. It's the one saving grace, but we got to maintain our livelihood until then. How exactly are you supposed to do that? I think it's at the point now. If I get a cut or something like that, you think I'm going to the hospital to get it doctored up? Ain't no way you're getting me near a hospital, because that's where the superbugs tend to be. I will literally powder a crystal of sulfur, rub it in my wound. I will literally take a shaker of salt, pulverize that shit into chaff, and pump that into the wound. I'll inject hydrogen peroxide directly into the wound before I'll go to a hospital and risk my life, risk getting MRSA or something even worse by going to the doctor's office for anything that's not life-threatening. I would recommend that other people consider at least doing the same. Obviously, giving medical advice is, I don't know, it's dubiously legal, so don't take that too seriously. I'm not a medical professional, but that's what I do. I'm certainly not going to the hospital unless my life is in danger. My hand got cut off. You know, I've got a fever of 105 or something. Yeah, that's okay. If I've got the common cold, a low-grade flu, a few cuts on my hands, no, I'd rather go rub dirt all over them because it'll probably help me more than going to the hospital will. Don't over-shelter yourselves. Don't necessarily think that it's necessary to go to the hospital for every cut and abrasion, because that's probably how you get fucked in the long term. You think about it, you get a lot of sick people congregating in one area. That's where those bacteria potentially are. And we don't have probiotic mentality going on. We've got antibiotic mentality going on where they spray everything down with antiseptics. And it doesn't completely work, let's face it. Therein lies the problem. It's very funny. They're bringing back something that was used in the trench warfare days to try to deal with the problem that they created in modernity. Ask yourselves if they're that intelligent, perhaps, after all. That's about all. Peace out.